You need to understand. I don't have a conscience. I don't feel any remorse.
What happens when young love, pure, reckless, and all-consuming, collides with something far darker? At first glance, John Esposito and Alicia Woodward looked like any other pair of small-town teen outcasts, two young lovers drawn together by a bond they believed that no one else could break. Now, he was 21, she just 18, an age when most teens are chasing freedom, not fleeing from it. To their families, they were quiet, but to their neighbors, unremarkable. But behind the curtain of their seemingly ordinary romance, something sinister was growing. Because what happens when two fractured souls find each other? And instead of healing, their brokenness multiplies. When obsession replaces affection, and loyalty turns into a weapon. What began as an inseparable teenage love story would soon spiral into a brutal crime spree stretching across the East Coast, leaving 3 innocent people dead in their wake. That loyalty is what drove them to run, leaving behind their homes in New Jersey. Then they fled south, eventually making their way down here to Georgia, away from watchful parents, small-town gossip, and anyone who might keep them apart. To them, this summer road trip meant freedom, a fresh start where no one could interfere. But what should have been a chance at reinvention quickly became something else, something dark, something evil. Isolation set in, desperation hardened, and soon freedom turned to violence. Were these murders the product of manipulation, with one pulling the other deeper into the abyss? Or was their union something more terrifying? That together, their evil didn't just combine, it magnified. A love so warped it could no longer distinguish passion from bloodlust. Because one thing is certain, when your fate is sealed, there's no turning back. The gavel has fallen. I'm Nichole Mondshein, and this is Final Judgment, a deep dive into the final days, last choices, and chilling moments before execution on Georgia's death row. Some convictions unravel, while some sentences are overturned. The evidence has been laid bare, the jury has spoken. But was justice truly served? For some, there's no appeal, no second chances, just the final judgment. But for others, the final judgment isn't so final after all. Alicia Annette Woodward was born in 1977 and raised in the quiet suburb of Willingboro, New Jersey. And on the surface, her childhood looked ordinary, even happy. She was the daughter of a high school economics teacher, a bright-eyed little girl who took dance lessons, played sports, and filled her afternoons with marching band practice. Shy at first, Alicia would blossom and come out of her shell once you just simply got to know her. Her friends described her as upbeat, always smiling, a girl who just seemed to love life. But life, as it often does, had other plans. When Alicia was 13, her parents' marriage fractured, and their divorce shook her deeply. Her father ended up moving out of their home, and in his absence, the once joyful, talkative little girl began to retreat inward. She carried those wounds in silence, her confidence slowly unraveling. By her late teenage years, Alicia was drifting. She kept to herself, struggled to just simply find direction, and eventually ran away from home when she was 16. Her mother actually filed a missing persons report for her daughter, but dropped it when Alicia ended up returning back home shortly after. Then, just a year later, Alicia dropped out of high school at the age of 17, despite her mother's desperate protests. She waitressed, she floated through jobs, but nothing seemed to anchor her. And then, at 18, with no clear path forward, no clear future, her mother persuaded her to apply for a position at a local pet store. It was a small decision, but one that would alter the entire course of her life, because that's where she met the young John Esposito. John's early life was far from ordinary. It was steeped in chaos, violence, and even crime. Born in 1975 in Gibbstown, New Jersey, John's childhood was shaped by the sins of the men in his family. His parents divorced when he was only 6 months old, leaving him without a stable home. And his father, well, he was not just absent, but actually infamous. Giovanni Esposito was convicted of manslaughter after shooting a man to death, hiding the body in a shed for days, and later dismembering it, cutting off the victim's head, hands, and feet. Only the torso was ever recovered. Giovanni was sentenced to 20 years in prison, leaving John to grow up under the weight of a very gruesome legacy. And by the time John was just 10 years old, his father's crime had caught up with him in the cruelest of ways. At school, he shared classrooms with the children of his father's victim. That meant constant ridicule, taunts, and violent confrontations. He wasn't just bullied, he was branded. To many in his community, John wasn't just a boy, he was his father's son, carrying around a name that reeked of blood and shame. But his father wasn't actually the only Esposito to make headlines for violence. Evil seemed to run in their bloodline. John's uncle, Raymond Esposito, was a known Philadelphia mobster, working for mob boss John Stanfa. In 1993, Raymond, who was given the nickname the man with half a heart, was convicted alongside John Stanfa and other associates for murder, extortion, and kidnapping. The Esposito name was already synonymous with organized crime long before John ever picked up a weapon of his very own. For John, it was as though he never stood a chance, a fair chance. Crime, brutality, and bloodshed weren't just influences in his own life, they were his inheritance. The weight of his father's brutality combined with his own aggressive nature pushed John further into isolation. He was often moody, prone to violent outbursts, and, like Alicia, he eventually dropped out of high school as well. Seeking escape, he briefly joined the U.S. Army Reserves at 18, but strict rules and discipline suffocated him. So within 2 weeks, he had quit and returned home in failure. And from there, his life just simply unraveled. Unable to keep a job, sinking into depression, John began to seek answers in darker places. He devoured books on demonology and black magic, carving occult symbols right into his own skin. A pentagram on his arm, an S for Satan, carved into his own chest. He even wrote letters to Satan, signed with his own blood. His mother was obviously horrified and discovered him conducting rituals in their home. John had even begun torturing small animals like cats, frogs, all acts of cruelty that spoke to something darker that was brewing beneath the surface. His pain escalated into a suicide attempt, landing him in psychiatric care, where he was diagnosed with an antisocial personality disorder. But that treatment didn't stick. He returned home, only to spiral further into his own mother kicked him out of her house, and even went so far as to file a restraining order against him. By the time John stumbled into that same pet store in the summer of 1996, he was adrift, homeless, working odd jobs, sleeping wherever someone would take him in. And there, filing out applications side by side, two outcasts collided. Alicia, the once cheerful girl scarred by abandonment, and John, the mobster's son, marked by violence and rejection. And the spark between them was immediate. Alicia was just drawn to John's danger, his wounded bad boy edge and persona, whereas John was intrigued by Alicia's quiet, mysterious demeanor. Neither of them got the job at the pet store that particular day, but they had found something far more intoxicating: each other. Within weeks, they were inseparable, spending every hour together, trading stories of broken homes and lonely childhoods. And for the first time, both felt understood, seen. It wasn't long before John introduced Alicia to his darker fascinations, the rituals, the symbols, the pull of the occult. And instead of recoiling, Alicia actually leaned in. Where others had judged or dismissed them, they accepted one another completely. Their love felt electric, a refuge from a world that had ignored and forgotten them. But together, their loneliness and pain didn't heal. it magnetized. What began as solace soon curdled into something dangerous. Two broken souls who found each other not in salvation, but permission and infatuation. And to no one's surprise, Alicia's mother was weary of John right from the start. Her daughter seemed consumed by him, talking about little else. Obsessed might be too simple a word. Alicia clung to John as if he were her only lifeline. Her mother, understandably, grew quite alarmed. Their relationship felt too fast, too intense, and far too consuming for a girl who had only just turned 18 years old. She urged Alicia to slow down, to step back, and to think. But Alicia wasn't listening. Just weeks after they met, John suggested that him and Alicia leave, run away together, leave their families and current life behind. He told Alicia he was bored of New Jersey, restless, and wanted to see what lay beyond the edges of their small town. The open road was calling, and he wanted her to come along. To her mother's dismay, Alicia agreed. But she had actually lied, telling her mom that she was spending the weekend at a friend's house. But instead, she packed her car, picked up John, and together, they disappeared, chasing the promise of freedom, of reinvention, of a love unbound by rules or parental concern or control. That summer of 1996 became their great escape, a makeshift road trip with no clear destination. For John and Alicia, the details didn't matter. Where they went, where they ended up, none of that was important to them. What mattered was that they were together. Two forgotten kids remarking their world, writing their own story, bound by obsession and secrecy. But this wasn't the story of young lovers simply chasing a dream. Their journey would not lead to fresh beginnings or new horizons. Instead, the reason you're watching, the further they drove, the darker their path became. With every mile, their devotion twisted tighter. Their choices grew bolder, and their bond grew even more destructive. By the time the road trip ended, it would leave behind more than just memories and love. It would leave behind bodies, a trail of pain and bloodshed across multiple counties and states. On September 20th, 1996, in rural Morgan County, Georgia, a farmer stumbled upon a gruesome discovery: the body of an elderly woman discarded in the dirt, brutally bludgeoned to death right outside the outskirts of the city of Madison. Who could have done this, and why? She had been beaten so savagely, so mercilessly, that it was clear this was no accident. This was personal, violent, and simply cruel. When police put out a call for information, they didn't have to wait long. Authorities in Lumberton, North Carolina, actually responded with a possible match. Actually, just the day before the body was found, an elderly man in Lumberton had reported his 90-year-old wife missing, and her name was Lola Davis. Lola was a retired librarian and had left the couple's home earlier that day to run some errands, the same routine that she always followed. First, she went to the beauty parlor to get her hair done, then picked up some groceries at their local Winn-Dixie. But she would never make it home. The description of her clothing, her scars, her appearance, they all matched the unidentified woman who was now lying dead, nearly 300 miles away in rural Georgia. And soon, another shocking discovery. Lola Davis's 1978 Buick Electra turned up abandoned on the side of a road in Talladega, Alabama. Her body in Georgia, her car in Alabama. How had she ended up so far from home, and who had driven her here? Inside the Buick, investigators recovered fingerprints and fibers. But while they waited for lab results, another clue surfaced. A local patrol officer recalled a very strange encounter near the very spot where the Buick had been left. The night before, he had noticed two young adults lingering at a truck stop nearby. Their names? Well, it was John Esposito and Alicia Woodward. And something about them set off some alarms. Their demeanor, their story. They claimed their car had broken down and that they were just looking for a hotel room for the night. Well, by this time, it was midnight. The town was completely empty. Their explanation just didn't sit right with the officer. Suspicious, the officer ran their IDs, but there were no outstanding warrants, no record to hold them on. So with no legal reason to keep them, he simply just let them go. But before leaving, the couple had asked for a ride to a local motel, and the officer said yes. By the time investigators began piecing the puzzle pieces together, Lola Davis's disappearance in North Carolina, her body dumped in Georgia, her car left in Alabama, John and Alicia, well, they had already vanished. They had checked out of the motel in the middle of the night, slipping away before anyone could stop them. Now the police had more questions than answers. How had two young lovers from New Jersey ended up in Alabama, connected to the brutal murder of a 90-year-old grandmother who was from North Carolina, and her body was dumped in rural Georgia? And if they could do this all to a defenseless elderly woman, what else were they capable of? As investigators scrambled to track down the couple, they turned to their families for some answers. Alicia's mother revealed that she hadn't seen her daughter in nearly 3 weeks, ever since she ran off with John. She explained that the only contact that she had with her daughter came in the form of a very brief, unsettling phone call. According to her mom, Alicia had called her from the road, asking for some money. Now, Alicia wouldn't tell her mom where she was, wouldn't really offer any details, but only told her that she needed cash. But Alicia's mother did share one chilling clue with authorities. To get her daughter the money, she had wired it to a bank in, well, guess what? Lumberton, North Carolina, the very town where Lola Davis had disappeared. That revelation tied everything together. It confirmed what investigators had already feared, that John Esposito and Alicia Woodward weren't just runaways in love, that they weren't just an odd, unique couple. They were prime suspects in the abduction and brutal murder of 90-year-old Lola Davis. And soon after, police got the evidence that they needed to back it all up. John's fingerprints were found inside Lola Davis's abandoned Buick. So with that, arrest warrants were issued for the couple. But when officers moved fast in order to track them both down, John and Alicia were nowhere to be found. It was as if they had vanished into thin air. And now, what began as a missing person case had exploded into a multi-state manhunt. Authorities racing to find the couple before anyone else crossed their deadly path. Nearly 2 weeks passed with no sign of the couple. Then, in early October, a break came, but not in the way that anyone could have expected. A park ranger in Colorado spotted two young adults trespassing in a restricted area of the Mesa Verde National Park. They were carrying a BB gun, a violation, inside the park and were promptly arrested. At first, it seemed like a minor infraction, but once the pair were booked and their IDs ran through the system, the truth came spilling out. These weren't just trespassers, they weren't just teens, they were fugitives who were wanted for murder in Georgia. The names came back as John Esposito and Alicia Woodward. The ranger dug deeper, running the tags on the vehicle that they had driven into the park. And what came back was even more alarming. The car wasn't registered to either John or Alicia. It had actually belonged to 90-year-old Lawrence Snyder and his wife, 86-year-old Marguerite Snyder, an elderly couple from Oklahoma City who had recently been reported missing just weeks earlier after failing to return home from a routine trip out. Now, authorities knew the danger was far greater than they had feared. Lola Davis hadn't been the couple's only victim. But where were the Snyders, and what had John and Alicia done to them? When police started interrogating the couple, they knew they wanted to first start with Alicia. Not only didn't Alicia ask for a lawyer, but she immediately confessed to everything, starting with what happened to Lola Davis. According to her, after leaving New Jersey, the couple ended up in Lumberton, North Carolina, where some of John's friends had lived. They, the couple, needed money, and Alicia claimed it was John's idea to kidnap an elderly person and take their cash, since they would likely be too weak to put up a fight. That's when, according to Alicia, the couple parked in the Winn-Dixie supermarket parking lot and picked out their target, Lola Davis. Alicia approached her, fabricating a story that she was afraid of her boyfriend and needed a ride to safety. And Lola, kind-hearted as ever, was convinced that Alicia, the young, helpless woman, needed help. But unfortunately, it was a trap and Lola was quickly ambushed. That's when John jumped into the back seat of the elderly woman's car, threatened Lola, and forced her into the passenger seat. Alicia drove while John rifled through Lola's purse, taking nearly $1,000 in cash and her checkbook. That's when the couple went to a nearby bank to cash a $300 check. Now, according to Alicia, she just followed John's instructions. They ended up driving down a rural Georgia road while John brutally beat Lola to death with a tree branch and discarded her body like trash. Alicia painted herself as a victim in the crime, but authorities couldn't shake the suspicion or feeling that she may have played a larger role. Once they fled Alabama, Alicia told investigators that they then took a bus to Oklahoma, having burned through all the cash that they had stolen from Lola. And it was there that John allegedly decided to target more elderly people. But this time, their victims would be the Snyders, an elderly couple. And this time, John was the one who approached them directly, claiming he and his girlfriend Alicia needed a ride to a nearby motel. The unsuspecting, kind-hearted couple, again, agreed. Once inside the car, John ordered them to the back seat while Alicia drove. She later claimed to steal a credit card and take about $1,000 from the couple. When they reached an isolated area of abandoned farmland in Texas, John allegedly instructed Alicia to pull over on the side of the road. And that's when he fatally beat Lawrence Snyder with a tire iron while his wife horrifically watched. Once Lawrence was dead, John killed Margaret as well. Police later noted that she just didn't simply even resist. Lawrence was killed less than 2 weeks before his 91st birthday. Again, authorities questioned Alicia's role. Was she truly a victim of John's manipulation or a willing accomplice to unspeakable crimes? After Alicia's confession, investigators turned their attention directly to John, and he seemed almost eager to recount the murders in very much graphic detail, describing how he deliberately targeted elderly victims because they couldn't fight back and were more weak. John even drew a map showing where the Snyders' bodies were left in the Texas Panhandle, as if proudly marking his trail of destruction. According to investigators, during John's interrogation, he coldly admitted, "You need to understand, I don't have a conscience, I don't feel any remorse." September 1998 marked the end of their flight. John and Alicia were extradited back to Georgia, where the weight of their crimes finally caught up with them in the form of murder charges and, of course, a looming trial. No more hiding, no more road trips. The fugitive couple was finally going to face some consequences. The couple was tried separately, and John's trial was ultimately moved out of Morgan County, landing in Baldwin County after a change of venue was approved. Prosecutors sought the death penalty against both John and Alicia, describing them as the worst kind of evil, preying on the elderly to fuel their spending spree across state lines and up and down the East Coast. An FBI agent who testified during John's sentencing phase claimed that John and Alicia had planned to abduct and murder yet another elderly person for money if they hadn't been caught. A Mulgee Judicial Circuit District Attorney, Fred Bright, who prosecuted John Esposito, said this: "They went hunting for elderly people to kill. He would have kept killing until he got caught. Those are not my words, but his." He admitted that in Colorado, where they were captured, they were looking for another person to kill. He showed no mercy or remorse in his killing. When he was captured, he stated, "I don't have any remorse. I don't have a conscience." John told authorities he had no conscience, no empathy, and the jury ultimately found him guilty on all counts. Despite his defense team's argument that Alicia was actually the mastermind to all of the killings, John was sentenced to death. When it came time for Alicia's trial, she maintained that she didn't actually in fact kill anyone, claiming she only witnessed the murders, claiming that she feared for her own life if she didn't listen to John. Then, in May 1999, prosecutors struck a deal. She would plead guilty in exchange for life in prison without the possibility of parole, sparing her from the death penalty. Well, Alicia accepted and is currently serving her life sentence at the Pulaski State Prison in Hawkinsville, Georgia. John remains on death row to this day at the Georgia Diagnostic and Classification State Prison in Jackson, still awaiting execution, while Alicia spends the rest of her life behind bars. John Esposito also received a life sentence in Oklahoma for his crimes against the Snyders. Decades after the killings, John Esposito remained on death row, still fighting to challenge the narrative that had put him there. Back in 2020, he actually filed a federal habeas petition, arguing that his trial lawyers had failed him in 3 critical ways. One, by not presenting evidence that Alicia was actually more culpable, by failing to share details of his abusive childhood and mental health struggles during sentencing, and by botching their final arguments in the penalty phase. But after review, the courts rejected his petition, leaving his death sentence intact. But still, John wasn't finished. Then in 2024, he reignited the legal battle, this time filing a lawsuit that claimed Georgia's laws had denied him the chance to conduct new DNA testing on key evidence. He argued that with today's technology, testing could potentially reveal Alicia as the one who delivered the fatal blows. His complaint zeroed in on a Georgia statute that lets courts block new evidence testing if they think a defendant is just trying to stall an execution. But John pushed back, insisting his request wasn't a delay tactic at all, pointing that he had filed during the pandemic when executions were already and actually on hold. He argued the law unfairly singled out capital defendants, violating the Equal Protection Clause. Though his motion had already been denied by a county judge, who questioned the chain of custody and doubted the results would ultimately change the outcome, his 2024 lawsuit marked yet another chapter in a case that has haunted the Peach State for more than 2 decades. Even now, the shadow of these crimes lingers. The path of John Esposito and Alicia Woodward, a reckless summer teenage road trip that spiraled into a cross-country trail of brutal murders, remains one of the most chilling chapters in Georgia's history. 3 elderly lives full of kindness and love were cut short, leaving families broken and communities shaken. And decades later, the devastation they left behind still raises questions that may never truly be answered. And yet, the story isn't entirely frozen in the past. John's recent legal maneuvers show that, even now, the case continues to evolve as the justice system grapples with new technology, timing, and the possibility of new evidence. While Alicia serves her life sentence and John awaits his execution, the echoes of their choices remind us that crime leaves a long, undeniable mark, not just on victims, but on the landscape of justice itself. In the end, the story of John Esposito and Alicia Woodward leaves us with more questions than answers. Was Alicia truly a frightened teen swept up in John's violent world, or was she a willing accomplice, just as cold-blooded as he was? John's upbringing, chaotic, neglectful, and frightening, may explain the fear and dysfunction that ultimately shaped him, but it doesn't excuse the darkness that seemed to run in his veins, a kind of brutality that felt almost like family DNA. 3 elderly people, Lola Davis and the Snyders, who should have spent their final years in peace, were instead turned into pawns in a deadly game, hunted, beaten, and killed with deliberate cruelty. Their lives ended not by chance, but by the calculated recklessness and malice of 2 young people on a road trip that became a nightmare stretching across state lines. A young killer couple who sought the most kind-hearted, the most vulnerable, the most unsuspecting, and left devastation in their wake across state lines and over a 2-week period. John waits out his days on death row, and Alicia serves her life sentence, yet the shadows of their crimes linger long after the headlines fade. Whether you see one as more capable than the other, it's clear that evil doesn't always wear a warning sign, and sometimes the deadliest journeys start with nothing more than a reckless desire to simply escape. One thing is clear, John and Alicia will spend the rest of their lives behind bars in Georgia. But the memory of Lola Davis and the Snyders, their lives cut short, continues to live on in the hearts of their loved ones and the wider community.